Hello, friends. Today there's a new story waiting for you on the channel. Make yourself comfortable and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next stories.
Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. Emily didn't open her eyes right away. First, she heard a sound, a short, insistent one, as if someone was trying to reach her through her sleep. She fumbled for her phone and squinted. A message from Laura. Emily frowned. Laura never texted at 7 in the morning. She opened the chat. "Amy, I need your help. Urgent." Emily sat up. The next message appeared almost immediately. "I need you to cover for me at work for 10 days. Emily blinked. "What?" She sat up in bed. "Laura, you work for your—" Emily typed the message and paused. She knew where her friend worked, at one of Manhattan's largest investment firms, and Laura was a personal assistant, not just a manager, but the most difficult person in the company. The next message arrived instantly. "Yes, he has." Emily stared at the screen. "Laura, I don't know how to do this." The reply came a few seconds later. "Amy, it's simple. I've got it all planned out. Paperwork, calls, coffee, meetings. You can handle it." Emily laughed softly. "Paperwork, calls, coffee," she muttered. She looked out the window. Beyond the glass, Brooklyn slowly awoke. Buses, people, car horns. Her ordinary life. Calm, predictable. And then suddenly, the phone vibrated again. "He won't even notice the difference, I promise." Emily shook her head. "I highly doubt it." She was about to refuse, but the next message made her stop. "I really have no one else to help me." Emily stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she sighed heavily and wrote, "Okay, just 10 days." She didn't yet know that it was at that moment that her life began to slowly change direction. The taxi stopped near a glass skyscraper. Emily got out and looked up. The building soared upward like a glass cliff. She took a deep breath. "Just 10 days," she whispered. The lobby inside was even more impressive. High ceilings, black marble. People in expensive suits moved quickly and confidently, as if they knew time was precious here. Emily felt like a stranger. She approached the reception desk. "Hello, I'm filling in for Laura Brooks." The girl behind the desk smiled. "Yes, Miss Carter, we've been notified." The security card was placed on the counter. 28th floor. Emily swallowed. "Thank you." The elevator took her up too quickly. When the doors opened, she found herself in a spacious office space. Glass walls, conference rooms, large screens, and a desk. That very desk. Laura's workstation. Emily slowly approached it. A folder lay on the desk. At the top, a neat note. "Amy, I've got it all written down. You can handle it." Emily opened the folder, and after 10 seconds, she quietly exhaled. "Oh my God." Meeting schedules, documents, calls, contracts. She felt as if she'd accidentally entered another world. She didn't yet know that in a few minutes, this world would become even more complicated. Emily tried to make sense of the schedule. The words in the documents seemed too serious. Legal language, financial reports, meeting schedules. She leaned closer to the screen. And then she heard footsteps, slow, confident. She didn't immediately look up, but suddenly she felt a strange sensation, as if the air in the room had changed. Emily slowly turned and saw him. A tall man in a dark suit stood next to her desk. He looked at her calmly, but there was something in his gaze that made her sit up instantly. "You aren't Laura." The voice was low, calm. Emily swallowed. Emily, I'm covering for her for 10 days." He looked at her for a few more seconds, as if assessing her. Then he nodded slightly. "I see." He paused and added, "Then let's start with the simple." Emily tensed. He turned his head slightly toward the kitchen. "Coffee." Emily placed the cup under the coffee machine. "Just coffee," she muttered. It's not complicated. She pressed the button. The machine hummed. Emily took a deep breath and picked up the cup. When she walked back into the office, he was already standing by the window. Manhattan spread out beyond the glass. She moved closer. Your coffee. He turned, and in that moment, everything happened at once. Her hand trembled slightly. The cup tilted, and a dark stream of coffee spilled right onto his shirt. There was silence. Absolute. Emily froze. Oh my God. She looked up. He looked at her. For a few seconds, speechless. Emily wanted to sink into the floor. Sorry, I didn't mean to. And then suddenly, he chuckled softly. Just a little. You know. He took a napkin and calmly wiped a drop of coffee from his sleeve. Then he looked at her again. Usually, the first day is less dramatic. Emily blinked. He paused and added, but it seems it will be more interesting with you. And it was at that moment that she realized one simple thing. The next 10 days would not be as calm as she had hoped. The next day, Emily arrived at the office early. She decided it would be safer that way. If she showed up before everyone else, she'd at least have a little time to sort through the chaos of emails she'd seen yesterday. The elevator opened quietly on the 28th floor. The office hadn't fully woken up yet. Several employees were already sitting at their computers. Some were talking on the phone, some were leafing through documents. But the atmosphere was different, more calm. Emily walked to her desk and set down her bag. She turned on her computer. The screen filled with emails again. Hundreds. She let out a quiet breath. Great, she muttered. Just great. Honestly, everyone reacts that way at first. Emily's head snapped up. A young man stood next to the desk. Tall, light hair, white shirt, sleeves rolled up. He was holding a folder. He smiled so calmly, as if they'd known each other for years. Sorry, he said. Didn't mean to scare you. Emily exhaled. You did. He extended his hand. Lucas Bennett, analyst. Emily shook it. Emily Carter. I know, he said with a slight grin. The whole office already knows. Emily frowned. Seriously? Lucas nodded. Well, it's not every day that Daniel Hayes' new assistant spills his coffee on him during her first hour. Emily covered her face with her hand. Oh my God, it's already a legend, right? Lucas laughed. Don't worry, legends are born every day at Hayes Capital. He nodded at her computer screen. Your first time in this role? Is it noticeable? Very. Emily grinned. Thank you for your honesty. Lucas leaned his hand on the edge of her desk. If it makes you feel any better, you survived the hardest part. Really? You survived your first morning with Daniel Hayes. Emily snorted softly. I'm not sure yet. Lucas leaned slightly closer and said almost conspiratorially, he's not the easiest person. I've already figured that out. Lucas smiled. But if he didn't fire you yesterday, that means he's interested in you. Emily raised her eyebrows in surprise. Interested? Professionally, Lucas quickly clarified, but his smile widened a little. 10 minutes later, the phone on Emily's desk lit up. A short message appeared on the screen. Daniel Hayes. Emily swallowed. She picked up a notepad and knocked on the office door. Come in. She opened the door. Daniel stood at the large desk. Dark suit, white shirt. No coffee stains today. He didn't even look up right away, looking through the documents. Good morning, Emily said cautiously. He finally looked at her. His gaze was calm, but too attentive. Good morning, Miss Carter. She came closer. You wanted to see me? He closed the folder and handed her several documents. Prepare your responses to these letters. Emily looked at the papers. Contracts, investment reports, financial agreements. Her heart sped up slightly. Okay. Daniel watched her face closely. Is that too complicated? Emily looked up. No. He raised an eyebrow slightly. Are you sure? She nodded. I'll figure it out. Daniel was silent for a few seconds. Then he said calmly, We'll see. She was about to leave when he added, "And, Miss Carter?" She paused. "Yes?" He looked at her a little more closely. "No coffee today." Emily smiled involuntarily. "I'll try." An hour later, Emily was still poring over the documents, but gradually she began to understand the structure. Contracts, deals, negotiations. Lucas appeared at her desk again. He placed a cup of coffee on the edge of the table. "A peace proposal." Emily looked at him. "You're taking a risk." "Why?" "If Daniel sees coffee next to me, he might get nervous." Lucas laughed. "Believe me, Daniel only gets nervous in two situations." "Which ones?" "When the deal is worth less than $1 billion, and when someone is lying." Emily grinned. "Very calming." Lucas sat down on the edge of the next table. "How did you even get here?" "It's a long story. We have a long workday." Emily shook her head. "I'm just filling in for my friend." Lucas nodded. "Olivia, you know her?" "Of course. She's a legend here." "Why?" Lucas grinned. "She's the only person who can argue with Daniel Hayes and survive." Emily raised her eyebrows. "That sounds impressive." Lucas smiled. "Yes." He paused. "But you're holding up pretty well, too." They laughed. And just then, the glass door to Daniel's office quietly opened. Daniel paused in the doorway and watched them for a few seconds. His gaze lingered a little longer than it should have. A few minutes later, the phone lit up again. Emily stood up. She knocked. "Come in." She entered. Daniel was sitting at his desk. A folder with documents lay in front of him. "Sit down." She looked a little surprised, but sat down. He opened the folder. "I looked at your answers." Emily tensed slightly. "And?" He closed the folder. "You're a fast learner." She exhaled. "Thank you." Daniel leaned forward a little. "Tell me honestly." Emily looked up. "Yes?" He looked at her carefully. "Have you worked in investments before?" "No." "Finance?" "No." He paused briefly. "Then where did this come from?" Emily shrugged. "Logic." Daniel looked at her for a few more seconds, as if he was trying to figure something out. Daniel picked up another folder. He closed it. Then he said calmly, "Then I have news for you." Emily's tone was tense. "What news?" He rose from the table. He walked to the window. Manhattan shone through the glass. Daniel turned to her. He said it as calmly as if he were discussing a meeting schedule. "You're flying with me to Singapore." Emily blinked. "Excuse me? What?" He repeated. "Singapore. In 30 hours." Emily looked at him for a few seconds, and only then could she say, I'm only replacing my assistant for 10 days. Daniel nodded. "That's exactly why." He paused and added, "Let's see how fast you really learn." Emily felt her heart begin to beat faster. It seemed her 10 days of work were about to get much more difficult and much more dangerous than she expected. The early morning air was cool and clear. The taxi pulled up at a private terminal at JFK Airport, much quieter and more private than the one Emily had seen before. No long lines, no crowd noise, just glass doors, calm employees in formal suits, and a few expensive cars parked outside. Emily stepped out of the taxi and paused for a moment. She looked up. A plane was parked on the runway. White, shiny, with a thin, dark line running along its hull. Small, but too elegant to be ordinary. Her heart sped slightly. "Only 10 days," she said quietly to herself. She hadn't yet gotten used to the idea of flying to Singapore, with a man she barely knew. The terminal doors opened, and almost immediately she saw him. Daniel Hayes stood by the panoramic window. Dark coat, relaxed posture. He was talking to an airport employee, but upon noticing her, he nodded briefly, as if he expected her to appear right then. Emily came closer. "Good morning." Daniel smiled slightly. So you came after all. Emily frowned. Did you doubt it? He shrugged calmly. A little. She looked at the plane through the glass. Is this yours? Yes. Pause. Emily said quietly, I've never flown on a private jet. Daniel looked at her carefully. So there will be a lot of firsts today. His voice softened a little, but Emily somehow felt that there was more to these words than just talk about the flight. The plane was much spacious than she expected. Soft chairs, a small table, warm lighting, and almost complete silence. Emily sat by the window. The plane slowly began to move down the runway. She looked at New York. The city gradually receded. Daniel sat across from her. He opened his laptop, but didn't start working right away. He looked at her first. You're nervous? Emily sighed. A little. Because of the flight? She shook her head. Because of what's going on? Daniel leaned back slightly in his seat. And what exactly is going on? Emily looked at him. This is my second day working for you, and I'm flying halfway around the world. Daniel nodded calmly. Right. Is that normal? He thought for a moment. No. Emily chuckled. Good thing we cleared that up. Daniel smiled slightly. The plane began to climb. They were silent for a few seconds, then Daniel suddenly said, Have we met before? Emily looked at him in surprise. No. Are you sure? Absolutely. He continued to look at her, as if trying to remember something. But after a second, he simply nodded. Maybe I imagined it, but there was still a hint of doubt in his voice. Singapore greeted them with heat and humid air. The city was ablaze with lights. Glass towers reflected neon and streetlights. Emily stood by the hotel window and looked down. The city seemed completely different. Fast, bright, almost unreal. The door knocked softly. Come in. Daniel entered. No jacket. His shirt was slightly unbuttoned at the collar. He looked tired, but calm. We have a meeting with investors in an hour, he said. Emily nodded. I've prepared the documents. She handed him the folder. Daniel quickly flipped through the pages and paused. Did you do this? Yes. He looked at her. A little longer than necessary. Good. Emily looked surprised. Is that a compliment? Daniel chuckled slightly. For me, yes. She smiled involuntarily. Late at night, the city looked even brighter. The rooftop bar was almost empty. A warm breeze slowly moved the curtains. Emily stood by the glass railing. Daniel came up beside her. They were silent for a few seconds. Then he said, You don't look like the kind of people who work for me. Emily turned. Is that bad? Daniel looked at her. His gaze was serious. I don't know yet. Pause. They were standing too close. Emily sensed it, and so did he. Daniel said quietly, I usually don't take people I've only known for 2 days on trips like this. Emily raised her eyebrows. Then why did you take me? Daniel looked at her for a few seconds. Then he answered, That's what I'm trying to understand. And for the first time, Emily felt that this trip could change not only her job, but both of them. The restaurant was on the top level of the building. Glass walls offered a view of Singapore at night. The city was ablaze with lights. Cars moved slowly below. The light reflected on the water of the bay. Emily paused for a second at the entrance. She still couldn't get used to how quickly her life had changed. 2 days ago, she'd woken up in her small Brooklyn apartment, and now she was standing in one of Singapore's most expensive restaurants, next to Daniel Hayes. He looked perfectly calm, as if he dined in places like this every day. Are you nervous? He asked quietly. Emily looked at him. A little. Daniel smiled faintly. No need. He nodded toward the table by the window. Our partner is already waiting. As they approached, the man rose from the table. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair, and a confident, almost predatory smile. Daniel. He extended his hand. Daniel shook it. Richard. The men exchanged brief glances. There was something more than just a business acquaintance in their gestures. Rivalry. Richard turned to Emily, and his gaze immediately changed, more attentive. "And you?" Daniel answered before she could say anything. "Emily Carter, my assistant." Richard inclined his head slightly. "Nice to meet you." His voice was soft, but his gaze was too revealing. He held her hand a little longer than necessary. It's not often that Daniel brings such beautiful assistants to meetings. Emily felt the air around her grow slightly tense. Daniel calmly took the glass of wine, but his gaze grew colder for a second. "We're here on business, Richard." Richard chuckled. Of course. But his gaze kept returning to Emily again and again, and each time Daniel noticed it. Dinner had been going on for over an hour. The deal discussion was becoming increasingly serious. Charts, investments, contracts. Emily followed the conversation closely. Sometimes she handed Daniel documents. Sometimes she wrote down meeting details. But every now and then she felt Richard's gaze on her. He looked at her almost with interest, sometimes even too openly. At one point he leaned closer. "Emily, you're not from the financial world, are you?" She looked at him in surprise. "No, I thought so." He smiled. "Daniel's people usually look different." Different? Colder. Daniel looked up from the documents. "Richard." His tone was calm, but a hint of hardness had crept into it. Richard raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I'm just making small talk." But his gaze slid back to Emily, again and again, and each time Daniel noticed it. Dinner had been going on for over an hour. The deal discussion was becoming increasingly serious. Charts, investments, contracts. Emily followed the conversation closely. Sometimes she handed Daniel documents. Sometimes she wrote down meeting details. But every now and then she felt Richard's gaze on her. He looked at her almost with interest, sometimes even too openly. At one point he leaned closer. "Emily, you're not from the financial world, are you?" She looked at him in surprise. "No, I thought so." He smiled. "Daniel's people usually look different." Different? Colder. Daniel looked up from the documents. "Richard." His tone was calm, but a hint of hardness had crept into it. Richard raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I'm just making small talk." But his gaze slid back to Emily, again and again, and each time Daniel noticed it. After dinner, Emily went out onto the roof of the hotel. The night breeze was warm. The city was ablaze with lights. She stood by the glass railing, trying to calm her thoughts a little. She heard footsteps behind her almost immediately. Daniel came up and stopped next to her. They silenced for a few seconds. Then he said, "Did you enjoy your dinner?" Emily turned. "That's a tough question." "Why?" "Because I'm not sure you discussed the deal, or me." Daniel looked at her. His gaze deepened. "Richard sometimes forgets his boundaries." "And you?" He tilted his head slightly. "What? Do you forget your boundaries too?" Daniel took a step closer. There was now only a little distance between them, too little for casual conversation. He looked at her for a few seconds. Then he said quietly, "You don't even realize how dangerous you are." Emily frowned. "Dangerous?" Daniel didn't look away. "Yes." Pause. The wind lifted her hair slightly. He continued to look at her. "Because you're starting to change things that would be better left the same." Emily felt her heart speed up again, and suddenly she realized one thing. This conversation had long since ceased to be work-related, and that's precisely what made it dangerous.
The night in Singapore was warm. The air smelled of the sea and the damp stone of the waterfront. The water in the bay quietly reflected the light of the skyscrapers. Emily walked along Marina Bay slowly, trying to clear her head a little. Dinner with Richard Cole was still on her mind. His gaze, his smile, and the way Daniel had abruptly ended the conversation. She heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Daniel stopped next to her. For a few seconds, they simply looked at the water. The city around them was alive. Music from a distant bar, the hum of cars, the laughter of passers-by. But next to him, it all seemed muffled. "Do you often leave business dinners like this?" Emily asked quietly. Daniel looked at her. "No." "Then why today?" He thought for a moment. "Because dinner today was strange." Emily chuckled. "That's putting it mildly." Daniel turned his head slightly toward the water. "Richard likes to provoke people. He does it quite confidently. He does it deliberately." Emily looked at him. "And he irritates you?" Daniel smiled slightly. "Sometimes." The wind lifted Emily's hair slightly. She looked at him again. "And today?" Daniel didn't answer right away. "Today, yes." Emily crossed her arms. "Because of the deal?" Daniel turned to her and looked her straight in the eyes. "Not only that." Her heart sped up slightly. She wasn't sure if she wanted to hear the rest. They walked in silence for a few minutes. Sometimes their shoulders almost touched. Emily felt it, and Daniel too. He suddenly said, "You've adapted too quickly." "To what?" "To my work." She chuckled softly. "Is that a compliment?" "Perhaps." He stopped. She stopped next to him. Now there was less than a meter between them. Daniel looked at her intently, as if trying to understand something that didn't fit into his usual worldview. "You said you've never worked in investments." "That's true." "Then where does this calm come from?" Emily shrugged. "I'm just trying not to panic." Daniel leaned slightly closer. "Most people panic around me." "Then maybe you should change your surroundings?" He chuckled softly. "Perhaps." She felt the tension between them become almost physical. Daniel took another step closer. Now the distance between them was very small, too small for a business conversation. Emily felt his breath and realized she wasn't moving away. For some reason, she couldn't. Daniel said quietly, "This is a bad idea." Emily looked up. "What exactly?" He looked at her lips, then back at her eyes. "All of this." Her heart began to beat faster, but she didn't move. "Then why aren't you leaving?" Daniel didn't answer. He simply stood there and suddenly raised his hand. His fingers barely touched her hair, which the wind had blown across her face. He slowly tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Her breathing hitched. The world around her became too quiet. He leaned a little closer, a little more, and Emily suddenly realized that just a few more centimeters and there would be nothing between them. At the very last moment, Daniel stopped abruptly, as if something inside him had triggered a break. He took a step back, sharply. Emily just stared at him for a few seconds. "What happened?" Daniel ran his hair through his hand and said quietly, "This is a mistake." Emily frowned. "What kind?" He looked at her seriously, too seriously. "You're my employee." Emily felt her stomach drop. They stood in silence for a few seconds. Then Daniel took another step back and added quietly, "And I'm not going to turn this into anything else." But there was something in his gaze that completely contradicted his words. Emily took a slow breath, and suddenly she realized one simple thing. He tried to keep his distance, but it was too late, because too much had already happened between them that couldn't be simply ignored. New York greeted Emily with a chill wind. After the humid air of Singapore, the city seemed almost harsh. She stepped out of the taxi in front of the familiar glass Hayes Capital skyscraper and paused for a second. Just a few days, but it felt like a month. Too much had happened, too much had changed. She entered the lobby and went up to the 28th floor. The office was already living its usual life. Phones were ringing, employees were quickly moving between offices. Emily walked to her desk, but just as she turned on her computer, Lucas appeared next to her. He placed a cup of coffee on her desk. "Peaceful morning?" Emily looked at him. "I don't know." Lucas sat down on the edge of the next table.
Usually people after business trips look either happy, he paused, or completely confused. Emily chuckled softly. And I look like the second option? A little, she sighed. That was a weird trip. Lucas looked at her carefully. Every trip with Daniel is weird. Emily crossed her arms. Tell me honestly. Lucas raised his eyebrows. What? Is he always like this? What? Complicated. Lucas chuckled. That's putting it mildly. He thought for a moment. Daniel Hayes doesn't trust people. Almost no one. Almost? Yes. Emily looked at him. Who does he trust? Lucas shrugged. Olivia. No one else? Lucas shook his head. As far as I know, no. Emily paused. Then why did he take me to Singapore? Lucas looked at her carefully. That's a good question. The cafe was small and cozy. Wooden tables, soft music, the smell of fresh coffee. Emily had arrived early. She sat by the window and looked out onto the street. People were hurrying about their business. The city went about its business as usual, but inside, everything was a little different. The cafe door opened. Olivia walked in quickly. Dark hair, a confident gait. She noticed Emily immediately. Amy! They hugged. How are you? I survived, Emily smiled. Olivia laughed. Good. They sat down. The waiter placed coffee in front of them. Olivia looked at her carefully. Well? What? What's it like working with Daniel Hayes? Emily silenced for a few seconds. Then she said, It's difficult. Olivia smiled. That's putting it mildly. Emily looked down at her cup. He took me to Singapore. Olivia froze. What? We were flying there to meet with investors. Olivia looked at her as if trying to make sure she'd heard correctly. Daniel took you to Singapore? Yes. Olivia leaned back in her chair. That's strange. Why? Olivia looked at her seriously. Because Daniel never takes people he's known for more than a few days on trips like that. Emily felt the uneasy feeling well up inside her again. I thought so too. Olivia let out a quiet breath. So he did it after all. What did he do? Olivia was silent for a few seconds, as if deciding whether to speak. Olivia finally looked up and said calmly, Daniel himself asked you to replace me. Emily froze. What? I was going to take a vacation, and he asked. She paused. Can you call your friend? Emily didn't immediately understand the meaning of these words. Wait. She slowly placed her cup on the table. Did you tell him about me? Olivia shook her head. No. Emily frowned. Then how did he know? Olivia looked at her carefully. That's when I wanted to ask you. There was silence for a few seconds. Then Olivia said quietly, Emmy. She leaned slightly closer and added, He's seen you before. Emily felt everything inside her suddenly stop because she was absolutely certain of one thing. She had never met Daniel Hayes before, but now that fact no longer seemed so obvious.
The morning in Manhattan was cold and clear. The sunlight reflected off the glass walls of the skyscrapers, turning the entire financial district into a vast, glittering surface. Emily stopped at the entrance to the Hayes Capitol building. She stood there for a few seconds, motionless. Olivia's words still echoed in her head. He's seen you before. Emily's grip tightened on the strap of her bag. She didn't understand why this bothered her so much, but inside there was a strange feeling, as if part of history were unfolding without her. She took a deep breath and entered the building. The lobby greeted her with its usual bustle. Employees hurried to the elevators, phones rang, someone was discussing deals, but to Emily it all sounded muffled, as if she were watching through glass. The elevator took her to the 28th floor. The doors opened. The office looked exactly the same as always. Same desks, same screens, same people. But for her, everything was different. She walked to her desk. She stood there for a few seconds. Then she picked up the folder and headed toward Daniel's office. She knocked. Come in. She opened the door. Daniel stood by the window. He was holding his phone,
but hearing footsteps, he put it down on the desk. "Good morning, Miss Carter." His voice was calm, too calm. Emily moved closer. She felt the tension building inside her. "We need to talk." Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. "That sounds serious." "I guess." He gestured toward a chair. "Sit down." Emily shook her head. "No." She paused. "I think I should leave." Daniel was silent for a few seconds. His face barely changed. "Leave?" "Yes." She looked straight at him. "I only covered Olivia for 10 days. Daniel nodded calmly. "Right. And those 10 days are almost up." He paused briefly. "And?" Emily felt her heart begin to beat faster. "And I think it's best to end it now." Daniel looked at her intently, but his gaze was undeniable. He simply said, "If you've made your decision, I won't hold you back." The words sounded too easy, too cold. Emily looked down for a moment. She had expected something different. What exactly, she didn't know, but definitely not this. She said quietly, "Then, thank you for the opportunity." Daniel nodded briefly. "Good luck, Miss Carter." Emily felt something tighten painfully inside her. She turned and left the office. The door closed quietly behind her. A cold wind hit her face as she stepped out of the building. She quickly descended the steps, trying not to think, but her thoughts kept returning to Singapore, to the waterfront, to the moment when there was almost no distance between them, and to his words, "You're my employee." She walked down the street, barely noticing the people around her. New York was living its own life. Taxis honked. People were hurrying. Somewhere music was playing. But inside, she felt a strange emptiness. She took out her phone. She stared at the screen for a few seconds. No messages. She chuckled softly. Of course. She stopped at the intersection. Central Park began before her. And suddenly she realized she didn't want to go home. She needed some peace and quiet. She turned into the park. The trees rustled softly in the wind. People were walking. Some were running. Some were reading books on benches. Emily walked slowly along the path, trying to calm herself. But inside, there were still too many thoughts and too many feelings she couldn't explain. "Miss Carter." A voice behind her made her stop. Emily turned slowly. Daniel stood a few steps away. No jacket, not his usual cool distance, as if he'd stepped out of his world and into hers. She looked at him for a few seconds. "How did you find me?" Daniel shrugged slightly. "New York isn't as big as it looks." He took a few steps closer. Now there was only a few meters between them. "You said you wouldn't keep me," Emily said quietly. "That's true. Then why are you here?" He looked her straight in the eyes and answered calmly, "Because I was wrong." Emily frowned slightly. "In what way?" Daniel took a step closer. Another one. Now there was only a little distance between them. His voice grew quieter, but there was a sincerity in it she'd never heard before. "I thought 10 days with you would be enough." He paused. Children laughed somewhere nearby. Leaves rustled softly in the wind, but for both of them, the world seemed to stand still. Daniel looked at her and said quietly, "But it turned out..." Pause. "I need my whole life." Emily felt her heart speed up. She looked at him, unsure what to say, but for the first time she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not coldness, not control, but real feelings. And suddenly she realized one simple thing. Those 10 days had truly changed her life, and perhaps his too.